Chapter 35. Chapter 30. Eliza slammed the Daily Prophet onto the table at breakfast that morning. Dumbledore claims he who must not be named is back. Girl who lived or girl who lied. Confirms Dumbledore's claims. It was only the second day of her summer holiday, and already it was being ruined. Sirius, open up the flu connection. I need to have a few words with my lawyer. You mean Lucius? Sirius said, apparently unconcerned about today's damning headlines. Yes, I mean Lucius. Eliza snapped and ignored Remus' barely muffled snort. Dumbledore takes my name and drags it through the mud. He's not my guardian, and he has no right to use my name to sell his baffling lies. I know, pup, but Sirius cut himself off, and Eliza watched as he and Remus seemed to silently communicate for a few minutes before Sirius finally spoke. If Voldemort really is back, wouldn't it be better for the word to get out? Ah, well, for some people it would indeed be better. Why do you care? She asked shiftily and frowned when Sirius let out a great heaving dramatic sigh and Remus began pouring an extra cup of tea. Sit down, pup. It's time we had a serious talk. I already know how sex works. We can skip the birds and the bees. Sirius let out an amusing sort of choked squawk, his face flushing a deep beetroot red as he looked at her in undisguised horror. You don't. This isn't about that, he managed to squeak out, and both Eliza and Remus snickered at his spluttering as Eliza slipped into the chair at the table. Then what is it about? She asked somewhat nervously. Narcissa had encouraged her to come clean to Sirius and Remus, but Eliza still remained doubtful. She had a good thing here, even if it was full of lies. She didn't want to ruin it. It's about the war, Remus cut in sternly, and Eliza immediately tried to protest, but quieted down under Remus' disapproving stare. Because there is a war coming, Eliza. We know it, and we know you do too, but we need to know what side of the war you'll be standing on, up front and brutally honest. Typical Gryffindors. There was no avoiding that question, no dancing around the truth or outmaneuvering. Eliza knew she could beat around the bush. She could lead them in circles and question their motives so much that they gave up till another day. She could lie or bargain her way out, but in the end didn't it all lead to the same place? Didn't it lead to Eliza, alone and questioning if her new family would eventually grow to despise her? I'm standing with the dark. I've allied myself with Lord Voldemort. Remus dropped his biscuit. Okay, Remus said a bit hysterically. You're going to have to explain that a bit more, like the whos and the whats and the whys and the whens, and I think she gets the point. Serious. Remus smoothly cut in. Eliza took it as a sign in her favor. She hadn't been kicked out yet, and they were willing to hear her out, which meant she was already doing a lot better than she imagined. I'll start with the how and then explain the why later, Eliza said, and took a sobering sip of her tea before she continued. I suppose you could say that it started when I met Voldemort, as everyone likes to call him, but really I think it started before that. It started in my first year at Hogwarts. Yule and my very first friend got me a very illegal book on wizarding traditions. Once she began to speak, it was rather easy to tell the whole story, even with Sirius and Remus interrupting every so often. Wait, are you telling me he was on the back of Quirrell's head? Don't tell me you wrote back to the strange talking book. An unbreakable vow, Horcruxes. She was surprised Sirius had known what one was actually, but then again, he was a black. Their library was full of the strange and unusual. It was your brother, actually, Regulus. He was the only one who found out about the Dark Lord's immortality. When he started going insane, Regulus decided to end it and destroy the Horcrux. He never made it out alive, but he didn't die a coward's death. He was anything but. Sirius grew unnervingly quiet at that, grey glassy eyes staring unseeingly into his teacup. It was a hard thing to hear, the truth. But Eliza knew both black brothers would rather have it than be ignorant. Swiftly, she carried on with her story, and soon Sirius seemed to perk up. Thomas Gaunt. Wait, I gave the shovel talk to that guy. I gave the shovel talk to Lord Voldemort. He thought you were quite funny, actually. Eliza. In the next Wisengamot session, Lord Gaunt will be making his very first appearance, and once I reach my majority, I'll be backing him all the way. I'm not stupid or naive. I know exactly what I'm getting into. I know this probably won't stay solely political. I know I've landed myself in the middle of civil war, and I completely understand if you two wanted no part in it, or wanted nothing to do with me. Eliza said strongly, looking at the pair of them. You know our goals and aims, and I'm not asking you to support me blindly. You have the option to walk away, and I wouldn't hold it against you. But you deserved the truth. Eliza breathed in deeply before continuing. I'll go and stay with the Malfoys for a few days while you process everything and come to a decision, oh pup. Sirius cut her off somewhat brokenly and reached across the table to wrap her dainty hand in his own. There's nothing you could say to us that would turn us away. But in the First War, you were allied with Dumbledore, you. That was a lifetime ago. Sirius cut in with a warm, consoling smile. And look where it got us. I've been in Azkaban for years, and Dumbledore did nothing to clear my name. Dark creature rights have been stripped every year, and he stands aside. Dark magic is banned, old families are scorned, and magical Britain grows weaker by the day. The thing is with Dumbledore, said Remus, is that, in an attempt to escape his past, he had pushed things too far the other way. From what you say, Eliza, your aims sound reasonable, brilliant even. Eliza shuffled nervously under their warm stares. It's not just my plan. If you stand by me, you're standing with Tom. Sirius and Remus shared another one of those infuriating looks again before they turned back round to Eliza. It doesn't matter, Eliza, we're family. Forever and always. And then, like the adult he was, Sirius transformed into Padfoot and toppled their chairs over, burying her underneath his weight. Eliza cackled as Sirius' tail wagged furiously, and she tried to escape from beneath him as Remus looked on in amused exasperation. Family. Forever and always. Lucius had not been a practicing law wizard for years, but Merlin did he still work fast. Not even 2 days after Eliza had requested for certain reporters to be sued for libel did she have them on a silver platter. They were still allowed to write about Dumbledore, of course, but Eliza's name was to stay firmly out of it. Tom had wanted to use Dumbledore's loud and obnoxious proclamations as a smoke screen of sorts to keep attention of their real movements, but it wouldn't work if Eliza's reputation was damaged in the process. All it took was a few words with Rita Skeeter for a counter-article to be published about how Dumbledore was trying to stir trouble in times of peace, and maybe his age was getting to him. It was quite masterfully done, in Eliza's not-so-modest opinion. She spent the next few weeks being dragged around by Sirius and Remus, who were determined to fit in some dearly missed family bonding. They didn't stray out of England, but the Blacks had more summer homes than they could count, and they spent June hopping from one to the next. She stopped questioning just when Remus had started living with them somewhere between Cornwall and their short full-moon visit to the Forest of Dean. It was surprisingly fun, doing normal things for a change. They sunbathed on the beach, and Eliza went diving in the sea, and on the way home, Sirius bought her ice cream. Things she had missed growing up that she loved to do now. They even braved going to the Muggle cinema every now and again, and Sirius had yet to stop bleeding over the trailer for the second Jurassic Park film. You would think that dinosaurs weren't as exciting as being a wizard, but according to Sirius, you would then be wrong. They returned to Grimmauld after a brief stay in York near the end of June, and 2 days after that she received a letter from the devil himself. Dear little star, we have much to talk about that I think you will find quite enlightening. The first Wisengamot session of the month takes place this Monday coming, and I would appreciate it if you would join me in scheming, as you so often put it. If you are able, please flew to the Knot Manor at your earliest convenience. Yours, Tom. Is that your Dark Lord? Sirius asked, munching on a cracker as he walked back into the living room. He's not my Dark Lord, Eliza said back on instinct and started shrugging out of her leather jacket. If she was going over to Knot Manor, then there was no way she could show up in Muggle clothes. Creature, Eliza called and waited for the elderly elf to pop up beside her. Could you fetch my summer cloak from my wardrobe, please? Yes, little mistress, he answered and disappeared with a quiet pop. And just where do you think you're going? Sirius asked, wagging a finger in mock parental disapproval that had Eliza smiling fondly. I'm going to Knot Manor to meet up with Tom. I'll probably be back in time for tea, Eliza answered, and thanked Creature when he appeared with her light black cloak, slipping into it as Sirius pulled a face behind her. You're sure you'll be fine over there, pup? Sirius asked worriedly, and Eliza warmed over his blatant concern. I'll be fine, Sirius. Necromancer, remember, There's nothing that can stop me getting back here. Sirius grinned widely in response, and then began pushing her towards the flue with a bark of laughter. Well, go on then. Don't keep your Dark Lord waiting. Not my Dark Lord, Eliza called over her shoulder before she threw a handful of flue powder down. She disappeared into the roaring flames, but not before she heard Sirius' muffled shout of bullshit behind her. She stumbled out of the fireplace on the other side into Theo's waiting arms. Will you ever learn to use the flue properly? He said, exasperated, as Eliza righted herself. If I do, you and Draco will owe Blaze 5 galleons. How did you even? They were interrupted by a muffled laugh, and Theo immediately jolted into action. Ah, yes, he said, straightening. Eliza, meet my grandfather, lord to the most noble house of Nart. Grandfather, please meet Eliza Potter, heir to the most noble and ancient house of Black and most noble house of Potter. Well met, Lord Nart. It is an absolute pleasure to meet you, Eliza greeted easily, shaking hands with the old man. He looked a bit like Theo. He had his eyes, and even though he was old and graying, there was a youthfulness about him. The man commanded respect. Well met, Heir Black. I have heard much about you over the years, and I believe the pleasure is mine, he said to her warmly, and Eliza felt herself like him just a bit more. There were no false pretenses here. Yes, he was a powerful lord, but he was also just a man who was pleased for his grandson, and Eliza respected that more than anything. I do hope you've only heard good things, sir. I'm afraid I might have given your grandson a few premature heart attacks over our years at Hogwarts. Lord Nart let out a booming laugh at that, as Theo snorted sardonically beside her. That's because you're a menace, little star, Tom called, walking into the room with a small smile on his lips. If I'm a menace, then, Merlin knows what you are, Eliza quipped, and Tom paused to smirk for a moment before shooting back. Why, I'm a Dark Lord. Keep up, darling. Eliza let out a short laugh at both Tom's words and Lord Nart's obvious bafflement as he looked between the pair of them. I'm sorry to interrupt your meeting, Alexander, Tom said smoothly after he finally reached Lord Nart's side. But Eliza and I have some pressing matters to discuss, so I hope you won't mind if I steal her away for a bit. We shall return to dine with you tonight. Lord Nart nodded in agreement with a smile she often saw on Sirius' face that spelt nothing but trouble, of course, my lord. I promised Sirius I would be back for tea, Eliza complained as Tom started shooing her down the hallway. Well, tell him you can't make it. He won't be happy. If you continue to complain, neither will I. The door closed behind them, but not before they both heard Lord Nart's warm, booming laughter. Have you been staying with Lord Nart long? Eliza asked curiously as they finally reached an office Tom must have commandeered as his own. The curtains were drawn, and the only light came from the various candles Tom had lit about the room. The warm wooden desk was piled high with papers. Alexander was one of my most faithful followers back in Hogwarts, Tom explained, slipping into the chair across the other side of the desk. He pulled away in the height of my crusade, as it were, but has gladly welcomed me back with open arms. Now I have returned to my old self. Both Barty and I have been staying at the manor since the start of summer. Eliza hummed in acknowledgement as she hopped into the chair at the other side of the table, meeting Tom's ruby-red stare. I would love to catch up later, but something tells me you called me here for business rather than anything else. Tom heaved a sigh and seemed to make an aborted motion to pinch his nose before he reached down to open up a drawer in the desk. A moment later, he slammed a gigantic file onto the table. It seemed to emit an aura of depression. What is that? Eliza asked, disgusted by the sheer size of the binder. The hell that is the Wisengamot, Tom replied, and Eliza let out a low whistle. The first part is full of the proposed bills that will be debated in the next Wisengamot session after I'm introduced, although no doubt it will roll over into the next one. Tom explained, unclipping a portion of the binder and handing the sheets over to Eliza for her to scan them. This part, he continued, gesturing to the largest chunk of the binder that seemed to be split in an oddly intense color-coded system, are all the bills and amendments I'm determined to change or scrap. I can understand why you just decided to declare a war, Eliza said wryly, and Tom let out a snort. The last bit are drafts of legislation I wish to implement or ideas for proposed amendments. But I won't be able to start feeding those through until I've established myself more firmly. You should look into building allies in the light faction. People are more likely to vote on legislation if it's proposed by a well-known light noble, Eliza commented, and Tom nodded in agreement as he shifted through more and more papers. Seriously? Eliza questioned, waving a sheet of parchment incredulously, a motion to place a new cap on broomstick speeds. Why do you have to deal with this shite? Because the ministry is a headless hippogriff masquerading as a functioning government. Tom drawled, making Eliza snort in response. Each department proposes new legislation. If it makes it through the elected officials, which it usually always does because they're incompetent, it ends up on our desks, Tom complained, and he really must be feeling stressed because he never complained. Everything was a challenge to him, a different game, and a new battlefield. Instead, he just sounded tired. Are you resting enough? Eliza asked suddenly, looking up from where she was jotting down some annotation next to Tom's already scathing remarks. Tom gave her a pointed look and went back to sorting his mounds of paperwork. I'm a bit busy, actually, he bit out, and Eliza rolled her eyes at his needless posturing. Listen, she said seriously, shoving aside a stupid amendment on the thickness of cauldron bottoms. You were severely injured, and you gained almost 40 years of memories in one go. You can't tell me that processing that much hasn't given you trouble. I'm fine, Eliza. If you need to mother someone so ardently, you might as well leave here. He drawled out impossibly, and Eliza felt her anger spike. Focusing on her crackling magic, she easily shot Tom with a wandless stinging hex. He jumped back with a shock and glared at her, red eyes flashing dangerously, but Eliza didn't let him speak. See, if you really were fine, you could have blocked that and sent it back tenfold. So something's bothering you rather than some. Eliza paused and flicked through the rest of the binder, wrinkling her nose in disgust at what she saw, rather nasty dark creature bills. Tom looked at her with an unnervingly blank expression for a few moments, the flames of the candles flickering in his red-eyed stare before he let out a pensive sigh. So perceptive, little star, he quipped with a half-smile, and Eliza shook her head in response. I find it's a good quality to have when you're dealing with dark lords. Tom huffed a laugh before propping his chin up against his hand, keeping his eyes trained on hers. After I received my memories, I found a rather concerning piece of information regarding the two of us and our connection, he said lightly, and Eliza felt herself perk up, leaning forwards slightly. It seemed the reason I targeted the Potters was because all those years ago a prophecy was made to one Albus Dumbledore. A faithful spy delivered me what they heard, the first few lines prophesizing my downfall, and at the height of my insanity I set out to destroy the possible threat. He explained as Eliza listened in rapt attention with a muted horror. A prophecy. But then it would have been self-fulfilling, Tom said, a look of deep regret on his face. 11 years spent as an incorporeal wraith because of my own follies. A tense silence settled around them before Tom seemed to jolt out of his own reverie. But as it were, I only knew the beginning of the prophecy, and even though we both don't place much stock in divination, I was determined to hear the rest. Dumbledore seems to believe you're prophesied to defeat me after all. They both take a moment to smirk at that. So while you were busy cramming for your end-of-year exams, Tom said, rolling his eyes at Eliza's disgruntled expression, I decided to take matters into my own hands and acquire the prophecy. Aren't prophecies held in the Department of Mysteries? I swear you never left the grounds when we were at Hogwarts. I didn't, Tom replied with an infuriating smirk, and Eliza reached over the table to poke him harshly. If you don't start making some sense soon, I'm just going to back home for tea, and you can wallow in Wisengamot pity alone. Tom chuckled lowly before speaking again. Prophecies are held in the Department of Mysteries. Years ago, in the height of my reign, one of my most trusted followers did the impossible and infiltrated the Department of Mysteries. However, he is now in Azkaban, Tom said with a scowl, so I put my next best man on the job, Lucius. Eliza questioned and rose her eyebrows at Tom's pleased grin. Brilliant with the law, even better with the imperious curse, Eliza laughed. She was sure Lucius would appreciate the compliment. In my stay with the Malfoys, I ordered Lucius to infiltrate the department and get me the prophecy. Lucius, in turn, found an unspeakable by the name of Bowl. Unspeakables are annoyingly resistant to the imperious curse, but as I said before, Lucius is the best of the best. But even he couldn't get Bowl to take him to the prophecy bowl. The name sounded familiar for some reason. What happened next? Eliza questioned, and stared in confusion as Tom's smirk widened. It turns out that we didn't need to infiltrate the department at all. Bowl knew what the prophecy said entirely. What? Eliza exclaimed. How? He knew the prophecy because something very unusual happened to it 2 years ago. All the unspeakables knew about it, even if they couldn't tell anybody because of their oaths. He knew it in its entirety because 2 years ago, when he had been working his shift, the prophecy split into two, Tom proclaimed, eyes lit up in the dark. It just broke. She asked, brows furrowed. It was never anything more than a self-fulfilling prophecy. When the orb shattered, it recited its prophecy one last time before becoming null and void, he said with a pleased smile. 2 years ago. That must be when we made our unbreakable vow, she said, and Tom inclined his head in agreement. What did it say? Eliza found herself asking, and Tom leaned back into his chair before beginning to recite the prophecy that had quite possibly began it all. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord shall mark them as his equal, but they will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hands of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. Oh, Eliza said in response, and Tom hummed non-committedly. I marked you as the prophecy child when I turned you into my Horcrux. Eliza had to restrain a shudder at his possessiveness. And although Dumbledore would probably like to believe the power I know, not would be love, I am rather inclined to believe it refers to your accidental necromancy. I believe the reason it shattered was because of our unbreakable vow. Neither of us can die at the hands of the other, with that particular binding over our heads. We would never level the other with a killing blow, Tom thought aloud, and Eliza found herself agreeing for the most part, but another thought niggled at her mind. The prophecy could have broken because of something else as well. It was all down to interpretation in the end, but Eliza would say she had never really lived while she was at the orphanage or at the Dursleys. She had gone about each day surviving, just as Tom had done when he was lost without a body. In fact, things only started to improve for her in direct correlation with Tom. When Tom finally possessed Quirrell, Eliza finally learnt about Hogwarts. She secured her position in Slytherin when the Diary Horcrux had begun possessing Ginny Weasley, and when Tom had gained a body, Eliza had finally gained a home with Sirius. Not all prophecies had to be dramatic. There was fate and destiny, and Eliza knew both she and Tom longed for greatness, but there were other things. That unbreakable vow she made 2 years ago, it didn't just save her life, it led her to something much greater. Destiny and fate and happiness. A life where she was well and truly living. She didn't mention that to Tom, though. A Dark Lord had no time for metaphors. Sadly, Bowl's mind cracked under the strain of betraying his oaths. I left him a rather lovely plant by his bedside, in thanks for his services. Tom finished airily, and Eliza instantly knew why the name Bowl had sounded so familiar. It had been in the papers. Bowl had been strangled by said lovely plant in the middle of the night, in some sort of freak accident. Normal people don't murder other people, Tom. Sounds dreadfully boring. In spite of herself, Eliza laughed. So she said quietly into the silence that settled around them, no more prophecy. No more prophecy, Tom echoed. And that was that. Except, of course, that was not that. I thought that was it on the prophecy. Haven't we been through this? Eliza complained. She flew back to Nut Manor 2 days later, arms full of Winsingamot bills she had thoroughly ripped to shreds on Tom's behalf. Lord Nut was stood in the foyer waiting for her next to Tom, watching them both with a rather bemused expression. It's a pleasure to see you again, Heir Black, he said with a smile. The man had told her the other night she had seemed far more like a Black than a Potter and wouldn't give up referring to her as one. Not that Eliza minded. She felt far more connected with the Black family than the Potters. Although that would probably change once she was allowed to access her full heritage at 17. Who knew what the Potter vaults were hiding for her? You might as well just call me Eliza, sir. I have a feeling I'm going to be intruding in your home quite often, she said easily, nodding her head in Tom's direction. Of course, Eliza. My lord is quite demanding, isn't he? Nut joked, causing Eliza to snicker quietly. Some of us actually have work to do, Alexander. Not all of us have large manners to laze about in, Tom quipped back, obviously at ease being around his old schoolmate. She wondered if it bothered him, seeing how old all of his followers were in comparison to himself. No, Lord Nut agreed easily. You just steal mine. Tom rolled his eyes with a small smile and walked away, clearly planning to head for his stolen office. Eliza shot Lord Nut an apologetic look and began trotting after him. The curtains in the office were drawn back today, bathing the room in sunlight as Tom took a seat in his chair. The desk was still full of parchment, letters by the looks of it, but the Wisengamot binder of hell was nowhere to be seen. Here are my thoughts on the new legislation, by the way, Eliza said, sliding over the thin manila folder that contained the legislation that was going to be debated in the next Wisengamot session in 3 days. Tom took the folder with a quiet hum and began parsing through it before setting it aside. That Umbridge lady is horrible. It would be much easier if you could just get rid of her, Eliza said, perching herself in the other chair next to the desk. I'm working on it, Tom responded and leaned back against his chair, closing his eyes as he practically bathed in the sunlight that was streaming through the window. It was an almost idyllic scene, really. It was easy to forget just who Tom was and just what he had done in the strange serenity that surrounded them. Dumbledore has reassembled the Order, and the war came crashing back down on them. He believes that I am still set on acquiring the prophecy for myself, and has no idea that the prophecy is broken, nor that I am no longer fixated on it. He's placed a few in the ministry to guard the Department of Mysteries, however there aren't that many members left. Eliza raised an eyebrow in question. The only proof he has that I'm back is the return of the dark mark on Severus' arm, and although that is enough proof for some, for many it wasn't enough to return to a life of war. Especially with Fudge and the papers condemning Dumbledore at every turn. I fail to see where the bad news lies in that, Eliza commented, and Tom leaned forward, propping his head in his hand. We have a choice now, he said easily, and Eliza felt her lips quirk into a small smile. Dumbledore and the Order are expecting me to return to my old ways. The silence destroys the Order's belief in Dumbledore, yes, but it also means Dumbledore may turn his attention onto other things. Whereas if you stage a few raids and lead them on a wild goose chase, they won't pay any attention to Lord Gaunt as he takes the wizarding world by storm. Eliza continued, easily seeing where Tom was heading. Tom nodded at her assessment and continued to look at her with those unnerving red eyes. Eliza paused to consider their options, mulling them over for a while. Right now, Dumbledore still holds a lot of political clout in the world, even if he is being criticized by the Daily Prophet. He's still the Light Lord, and he is still the defeater of Grindelwald. Until I have a chance to start enacting all my plans, everyone is more likely to agree with him than the mysterious Lord Gaunt. Eliza thought out loud. He's still a formidable foe on the battlefield, but you won't actually be engaging in traditional war. They're expecting it to be like the First War and will prepare accordingly, especially if Dumbledore begins hunting for your non-existent Horcruxes. They would have no time to expose you whilst you are still building a name for yourself, Eliza finished, and a thoughtful look came across Tom's face. I have no followers for raid work, Tom muttered, scrunching his nose. Then just do it yourself. You can't tell me you wouldn't enjoy it, Eliza joked as Tom looked up at her in mild surprise. I'm pretty sure you're not meant to be encouraging me, little star. She was sure she wasn't as well. But they were at war. She had no control over Tom's actions any more than she could control the weather. If he decided a few muggles had to die on his crusade to take over magical Britain, then so be it. Eliza shrugged her shoulders in response. Perhaps target the muggle world. As long as you don't get caught, you'll find no complaints from me. Tom hummed thoughtfully before an impish grin grew on his face. Would you like to join me, darling? Eliza let out a bark of laughter and stood up from her seat. Family bonding is prioritized over dastardly Dark Lord things, I'm afraid. Just take Barty with you if you're that lonely. She dodged the hex sent her way with predictable ease. Tom's raid never made it into the papers. He flattened an entire muggle prison to the ground, one of the highest security ones in Britain. No doubt he was still bitter about his followers being locked away in Azkaban. The muggles wrote it off as a gas explosion, but that didn't mean no one else had noticed. The Order of the Phoenix were back in business. Not only that, but the day after the raid, their leader came knocking on their door. Eliza, Sirius, and Remus were all sat at the table across from Dumbledore. 4 pots of steaming tea sat in front of them all, untouched. I wish there was an easy way to say this. The old man began after the pleasantries were out of the way. Eliza was resisting the urge to throw the scalding hot tea into his face. In fact, she was imagining doing a lot worse, but the tea was the closest thing to hand. But Lord Voldemort has indeed returned. If Dumbledore was expecting anything more than grim faces, he was mistaken. Remus let out a long, withdrawn sigh beside her. We had suspected as much. Once he had Eliza's blood, we knew it wouldn't be long until he was back. We just thought we would have longer, Eliza added on gravely, every inch the war-hardened child Dumbledore expected to see. The perfect warrior he had wanted to sacrifice in his game of chess. The Order of the Phoenix has reformed Remus. Sirius, your old places are waiting for you if you chose to return, Dumbledore said, his blue twinkling eyes resting on Sirius, who had remained oddly silent throughout the encounter. I know we're not on the best terms, Sirius. No, Sirius cut in with typical Gryffindor brashness. We're not. Because for 12 years I rotted in Azkaban, and you did nothing. At least Dumbledore had the decency to look ashamed. But my goddaughter is the most important thing to me. I'd do anything to protect her. Eliza and Remus traded curious glances as Sirius continued to speak. They hadn't been prepared for Dumbledore's visit, and Eliza had a feeling they also wouldn't be prepared for whatever hair-brained plot Sirius was in the middle of hatching. Yes, I'll rejoin the Order of the Phoenix. Eliza did nothing to betray her shock. She sat through Dumbledore's beaming gratitude and bid him goodbye politely when the old coot finally left their home. It was then she turned on Sirius. What the fuck? Language, Remus chastised over Sirius, laughter. But I can't say I don't share the sentiment. Sirius care to explain. Shouldn't you be happy, Eliza? Budding dark lady that you are, Eliza continued to stare at him blankly. You've successfully infiltrated the Order thanks to yours truly, Sirius declared smugly, obviously ignoring that Severus was already their acting spy in the Order currently. She couldn't deny that it could only be a good thing to have more people in the Order. Dumbledore didn't act in cells like the Dark Lord used to, but the more people they had in Dumbledore's trusted circle, the better. Well, Sirius, rare as they may be, you do indeed have your moments, Eliza said with a small smile. Thank you, Sirius crowed before the insult caught up with him, to which he responded by gasping dramatically. You're so cruel to me, he simpered, pouting heavily, and Eliza rolled her eyes, walking back into the kitchen to savor her tea now that Dumbledore was gone. It's your punishment for not going to the first Wisengamot session tomorrow, Sirius huffed, but didn't disagree. Eliza had tried many tactics over the weeks to try and get Sirius to take up his proper mantle as Lord Black. Sirius enjoyed throwing his title around without actually taking care of any of the responsibilities that came with it. Not that there were many responsibilities when their family was so diminished now anyway. Eliza knew that Remus took care of all of their finances, Merlin bless him, and Sirius had said that the lordship was hers the second she turned 17. He just had no interest in politics, even if he did hold 2 seats as a most ancient and noble house. Eliza wasn't too bothered about him not being interested in politics. Really, she had just wanted someone in the room when Tom claimed his own seats on the Wisengamot. She could just imagine Dumbledore's face when he attended the meeting to find that Durmstrang's champion, Thomas Gaunt, had claimed the Gaunt lordship right under his nose. Sirius didn't care for any of that, though, so Eliza would content herself with Rita Skeeter's report that was sure to be a perfectly scintillating read when it came out the day after. Except she didn't find out from the papers. In fact, mere hours after the Wisengamot session ended, she received a flu call off the very man himself. You know, Eliza said as she stumbled out of the flu on the other side, you could come to my house, just once. Sirius wouldn't poison you. Instead of responding to that like a normal person, Tom instead leapt straight into conversation. Dumbledore has been stripped from his position as chief warlock. What? Eliza gasped, and Tom smiled wickedly in response. But the Dumbledore house doesn't have any seats of their own. He's been removed from the Wisengamot in its entirety. He only has his elected imposition left. Eliza let out a bright laugh. Out of all the things they had expected, they had never expected fate working in their favor for once. Who are they appointing as the new chief warlock? Eliza asked curiously as they walked into Tom's office. There's talks of Amelia Bones, but then she'd probably have to step down from her post in law enforcement. Augusta Longbottom is trusted by the majority. Tom spoke, pulling out a butterbeer, which was odd because Eliza knew for a fact that Tom hated butterbeer and a bottle of wine. Because he was a pretentious sard like that, Lady Longbottom used to be firmly in Dumbledore's pocket. But after the cause stole her son from her, no one knows quite where she lies. He conjured a wine glass and began pouring the liquid into it. Others have tossed about Selwyn, leader of the neutral faction, to be nominated. It's all up in the air right now, but the most important thing is that Dumbledore is gone. Tom finished raising his glass in a toast as Eliza uncorked her butterbeer. To new beginnings, he said with a half-smile and bright eyes. To new beginnings, Eliza echoed. The rest of July passed in relative peace. On the days Sirius and Remus attended order meetings, Eliza met up with her court in Diagon, browsing Nocturne Alley and eating ice cream in the sun. Between his duties as Lord Gaunt and whatever else he got up to, Tom had left her alone for a few weeks now. Barty told her he was out establishing alliances with dark creatures and wasn't expected back until the next Wisengamot session in a few days' time. Coincidentally, it would also be her birthday. Eliza, Sirius whined from where he was sprawled out on the sofa. Just tell me what you want for your birthday. Well, Eliza had barely gotten out before he cut her off. Something that isn't somewhat illegal to acquire. Eliza felt her mouth close with a soft click. The thing was with birthdays was that Eliza was used to not having a lot of things, which meant there was never anything much that she found herself wanting. Her court always managed to surprise her with sentimental gifts. Tom was a magpie to the highest degree and always gifted her with the rare or coveted. Usually jewelry, and Narcissa and Lucius were Malfoyes, which meant they went above and beyond with luxuries. And there was always books. Eliza always loved books. She treasured all her gifts, but she could never actively think of anything she wanted herself, and apparently neither could Sirius. What about a dog? We could go out and get a dog. Why would I want a dog? Isn't that what we have you for? Eliza shot back, throwing her legs over the side of her armchair in attempts to get more comfortable. Sirius let out a quiet "hey" and tried to chuck a pillow at her, which she caught deftly. Will you at least let me throw a party for you this year? He asked hopefully for the 10th time this week, turning his puppy dog eyes onto her. Eliza let out a long, resigned sigh before she nodded her head minutely. Sirius let out a whoop of excitement and immediately leapt up, shouting for Remus as he ran out of the room. She probably wouldn't regret saying yes. Probably. The day of her birthday arrived, and Eliza woke up before Sirius could even attempt to prank her. Thanks to time travel, she had technically been 15 for a while now, but July 30, was a good official date as any. Jumping out of bed with a muffled yawn, Eliza lazily got ready for the day, hopping into a pair of jeans and pulling a cropped jumper over her head. She was just putting on her socks when she heard Sirius, not so sneaky movements from down the hall. Eliza waited until he was just in front of her door, and then she opened it wide with a bright and cheery, "Good morning, Sirius." Sirius let out a resounding groan, almost drowning out Remus. "I told you so," from down the corridor, where he had wisely chosen to stay out of the way. "Why are you always awake?" he complained as they all made their way to the kitchen where Creature had prepared a birthday breakfast for her. "The early bird catches the worm," Eliza quipped back and thanked Creature fondly for the breakfast he had set out for them. "The worms are all asleep," Sirius muttered petulantly, but soon broke into a wide, happy grin. "Happy birthday, pup," he wished, and leant over the table to ruffle her hair fondly. It was the second birthday she was spending with Sirius and Remus, and Eliza still wasn't over the odd domesticity of the whole practice. She loved every second of it. She spent the rest of the morning with Remus and Sirius. After eating their breakfast, they pushed their presents over the table. Remus, ever the professor, had gotten her some rather sought-after defense books, written by a rather renowned academic that Eliza immediately began passing through. Sirius had given her very own snitch, charmed to never stray more than 10 meters away from her. Regulus used to be a seeker, Sirius said, rubbing the back of his neck. This was the snitch he caught that won the Slytherins the House Cup. I know you never got to meet him, but he would have loved you. Really, Sirius explained haltingly, and Eliza felt herself well up with emotion before she flung herself at Sirius. He hugged her back just as warmly, and when they had both composed themselves, Eliza asked if he wanted to duel, looking at the books Remus had given her. Sirius gladly took her up on the offer, and the entire time the snitch stayed in Eliza's pocket, a constant weight of the memory of a man she would never get to meet. It was weird, feeling so attached to a dead person from a family she technically wasn't even fully a part of. Eliza thought it was because she had read his journal. She couldn't help but think of Regulus as a living, breathing person, unlike her parents who were just figments. Just someone with her eyes, or good with a wand. Or really, you couldn't find nicer people, when Eliza knew for a fact it wasn't true. Eliza had just hit Sirius with a levercrapus when they heard someone clear their throat delicately. Remus told me I would find you two up here, really, cousin. Could you not find a better way to celebrate Eliza's birthday than dueling? Narcissa asked from the doorway, a fond smile on her face. Eliza smiled brightly. Narcissa, she greeted and flicked her wand, sending Sirius crashing to the ground behind her. How is my favorite Malfoy? Glad to know where I stand, Eliza, said Draco as he appeared beside his mother. I'll just take my gift and leave then. Eliza snickered and made her way to the both of them, hugging them quickly as Sirius clambered to his feet behind them. Sissa! Sirius exclaimed happily as he finally joined them. Little Malfoy, Draco sniffed indignantly, and Eliza had to muffle a laugh. They all made their way to the parlor as Sirius and Narixa chatted happily. Father said he would come down later to see you, Draco told her quietly. He's at the Wisengamot session today with Lord Gaunt. I know, Eliza said simply, and watched as Draco rolled his eyes. Well, Draco began importantly, I bet you didn't know about this. And with that, he swung the door to the parlor open, and Eliza was almost immediately smothered in hugs off all her court who had been waiting for her. Laughing happily, Eliza pulled away and looked at them all. And what are all you doing here? Lord Black invited us, Theo said, while Sirius Fake gagged at the title in the corner, and it does happen to be your birthday. He finished teasingly, and Eliza laughed again, pulling him in for a small hug. They all sat around the table as Eliza opened her gifts, laughing and joking as the conversation carried on around them. It was odd seeing Narcissa and Sirius truly get along, but she supposed stranger things have happened. Lucius arrived an hour later with his own birthday wishes, and Creature popped back in with afternoon tea and an overly large birthday cake. It was fun, the kind of ridiculous fun that she was still getting used to. It was the kind of fun, the kind of small happy moments she knew she would treasure all her life. Her court, her family, some cake, and a room full of laughter. She didn't regret it at all. It was later, when Sirius was trying to explain Twister to a supportive but very confused Blaze, that they heard a knock on the door. Eliza frowned in confusion before pushing herself up from the table, walking through the house to the front door, and swung it open. Tom was stood on her doorstep. He was dressed in Muggle clothes for once, a dark blazer flung over a white button-up, which meant he had probably just come from another meeting with the vampires. Most dark creatures didn't like wizards. He held a bag in one hand and a bouquet of flowers in the other, and Eliza felt her heart stutter oddly. Hello, Eliza said, and her confusion must have been evident because Tom smirked softly in response. What are you doing here? It is your birthday, Eliza, he responded, and a wave of déjà vu crashed down on her. While technically I know it's not, I assume today would still be a cause for celebration. He continued and held the bouquet of flowers out towards her. Eliza took them from his hand and resisted the urge to smell them. Do you want to come in? Eliza asked, slightly taken aback by how much she actually wanted Tom with her, and moved aside slightly, but Tom shook his head in response. I wouldn't want to interrupt the festivities, he said diplomatically. You wouldn't be, Eliza said instantly, but Tom just shook his head again and held out the bag he had been holding until Eliza took it from his hand gently. He smiled at her again, a warm, tender thing that made her heart pound in her chest. Happy birthday, little star, he said softly, and Eliza peered into the bag, curiously finding 2 perfectly wrapped boxes inside, as well as a letter. When she looked up to thank him, he was gone. The street around her was empty, lampposts only just flickering on as the summer night drew in. Dramatic prick, Eliza said into the night. It came out far more fondly than she would have liked. When she made it back into the parlor, no one was even bothering to pretend they hadn't been eavesdropping on their conversation. At least Narcissa had the grace to not interrogate her straight away, unsurprisingly that Anna went to Sirius. What did he mean? Sirius burst out dramatically that it's technically your birthday. Eliza instantly looked towards Remus. You didn't tell him? She asked incredulously. All her teachers were made aware of her time travel schedule so they could all accommodate it. Remus stared back at her with a similar look. I thought you told him. The next 10 minutes were spent trying to explain to Sirius how Eliza had been time traveling since third year. So that's how you did it. Blaze crowed victoriously and turned to face Daphne, who was adamantly not looking in his direction. Pay up, Daph. You owe me 3 galleons. Eliza felt like she should be concerned with how much her court bet on her, but at least they seemed to be having fun with it. So when do you actually turn 16 then? Sirius asked, brows furrowed in concentration. I don't really know, Eliza said in response. The hours I go back by vary a lot. I obviously don't just use the time turner to go back in time for lessons. I use it to catch up on sleep or do homework or just to take a day off. The Hogwarts curriculum is boring, so I used to spend days with Tom last year learning from him instead. She explained and watched as they all looked at her with expressions ranging from being impressed to being somewhat horrified. But as it's owl year, and with the fact that my birthday moves backwards, every year I use the time turner. I'd say really late December sometime. But that's just time travel, Eliza said with a blasé wave of her hand, and ignored Lucius' small scoff of just time travel from the corner of the table. I still consider my real birthday to be today. I just might be able to claim my lordships a bit sooner than we expected if the time travel actually interacts with the goblin's records. There's a stupefied silence for a few moments before Lucius let out a short sigh. No wonder you've driven Severus towards a drinking problem. And with that, they all went back to celebrating. Eventually, everyone began to clear out, her court returning to their respective houses and Narcissa and Lucius leaving with promises to visit soon. Remus and Sirius both passed out asleep on the sofa after wishing her one last sleepy, happy birthday. It was only when Eliza finally returned to her room was she able to open Tom's presents. She pulled 2 boxes out of the bag and decided to open up the letter before she tore into the silver and green wrapping paper. Dear little star, I understand you haven't had much luck on the necromancy front. Fortunately, when I was discorporated, the ministry didn't manage to acquire all of my vaults. I had several off the shores of Europe containing a variety of artifacts. It was there that I found this book. Perhaps you will have more luck studying from it than I ever had. You could even try out a few techniques on your newest defense teacher if the curse doesn't get to her first. You'll understand when you see her. I apologize in advance, but she was simply in my way. Happy birthday, darling. Yours, Tom. Folding up the letter, Eliza turned to the larger package curiously and tore the paper off with undisguised glee. The book was old, heavy, and appeared to be bound in some sort of leather. It warmed in her hands. It was true that Eliza had no luck finding anything on necromancy over the holiday, and she ran a hand reverently over the spine of the book, promising she would read it later before turning to the smaller second parcel. Picking it up, Eliza unwrapped it carefully and lifted the lid off the box. A miniature kelpie lied within it, carved out of bloodstone, and it looked an awful lot like Nyctius, the kelpie in the Black Lake. When Eliza ran her hand over the carving, it began to move and reared up in her hand before trotting in a circle, thanks to the many enchantments layered over it. Eliza smiled giddily down at the gift and placed it on her bedside next to the bouquet of flowers he had also given her before she picked up the book. It was touching, almost overwhelmingly so, that he went out of his way to acquire those gifts for her, specifically for her. A kelpie just because he knew how fond of it she was, a book on necromancy because he knew how hard she had looked for anything on the subject, that he showed up on her doorstep with a damnable smile just to give them to her in person. Of course, all her other friends had shown up, but with Tom it was just different. With Tom it was always different. It was that thought, that one specific thought, that made Eliza drop her book as a realization swept over her. Because with Tom, it was different. No one else's presence had made her feel as giddy. She never looked forward to anyone else's letters as much as she did his. No one else made her nervous, and no one else had ever made her blush. Her heart didn't stutter at the sound of anyone else's laughter, and it was Tom who she had first thought of when Narcissa asked her about boys. It was Tom who challenged her and cared for her and made her feel fucking butterflies in her stomach. She had a crush on Tom fucking Riddle. Shit. Summer passed quickly after her birthday. She told no one about her little revelation. She suspected they would all think it was a long time coming. She had met up with Tom a few times since then, and nothing had changed in the way they interacted with her newfound knowledge, which just further proved how oblivious she had been, and how oblivious Tom must be if he had also not picked up on her feelings for him. Eliza refused to dwell on it too much, though. She was going to experience a crush sometime, and it made sense that it would be Tom. He was intelligent and powerful, not to mention handsome, but she knew she would outgrow it. Crushes didn't last forever after all, even if she couldn't name the specific moment he had started developing feelings for him. It was fine, really it was. Besides, she had other things to focus on other than her crush. The Order were still making moves against the non-existent threat that was Tom, and had offered to escort her to the station. Eliza had told them that they were all daft if they thought Voldemort was going to snatch her in the middle of platform 9 3/4, and that had been that. According to both Sirius and Severus, they were still planning to position some guards, just in case, although they were still very much focused on guarding the also non-existent prophecy. Severus had acted rather shiftily when Eliza had mentioned the prophecy, but she had brushed it off. Severus always acted strangely when Sirius was in the same room. Between keeping an eye on both the Order and Tom, who was busy with building alliances in the Wisengamot, and with neighboring dark creatures, it was to no surprise that September 1 was quickly upon them. Thankfully, she hadn't been made a prefect. She thought Severus had something to do with it, because no other professor would have thought to deny her, but she was glad in a way. She already had far too much to do, and Draco and Daphne would make excellent prefects for their house. Sirius and Remus walked beside her as they made their way across the platform, the Hogwarts Express in front of them. "Now remember," Sirius said as they came to a stop, "cause as much trouble as you can." "Please don't," Remus chimed in. "Make sure none of it's too illegal, though," Sirius added on as an afterthought. "Make sure it's not illegal at all," said Remus, and by now Eliza was blatantly snickering at the pair of them. "And stay safe," Sirius finished, pulling her in for a hug. "I'll be back at Yule, you know," Eliza said, the words muffled from where she was pressed against his robes. "I know," Sirius said, and impossibly hugged her tighter before letting her go. "And remember to write," Remus said, smiling at her fondly. "We're always just a letter away." "Have a good year, pup," said Sirius. Eliza nodded and shot them both a blinding smile. "I will." And then she began making her way towards the Hogwarts Express, dragging her trunk behind her. Her 5th year at Hogwarts. She couldn't wait.